Hi, and welcome to the 30 by 30 info session for Cohort 3. I'm Peter Goldsworthy. I am the GM of Startups at Launchpad. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands upon we're meeting today, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today, we are going through everything about 30 by 30 to give you a little bit of a taste test of behind the scenes of 30 by 30, as well as what will be in store for you in the latest cohort of 30 by 30. The agenda today, we have two guests joining me. It won't be a monologue from me for an hour, so you'll be happy to hear that. Today we'll be joined by Mark Orchard, who is one of the facilitators of the program, and also Jane Watson, who was one of the participants from XY Sense, who participated in Cohort 2. So more on that later. First of all, I'm going to take you through a little bit about what I share and in reflection, what I have reflected on in terms of the program. So let me just share my screen. Bear with me one moment. There we go. Okay, so 30 by 30, as the name suggests, what LaunchVic is intending with this program is to help create 30 new unicorns by 2030. So, what is it? What is the program? To give you a bit of a background, it's really to help those fast-growing scale-ups to be able to scale and win. And how we do that is by focusing on the HR, operations, and finance leaders of companies. And we think there's common scaling challenges that can become bottlenecks of growth. And we have a way of shortcutting that so that the teams can get ahead of those challenges. We really, and my promise to the founders is that it's going to reduce your time to have to solve all of these. You won't have to go back to a first basis of figuring it out by yourselves. There are people who have been in scaling companies and they've figured it out before you, so you can rely on them, and that's what this program does. And so the program has been delivered free of charge for 2 cohorts and is currently scheduled to run one more this financial year. So really, what's the benefit of 30 by 30? I'm going to go through this slide a little bit more with Mark and Jane when they get on. But as a top line, what we really focus on in the program is helping you and your team become more aligned. We help those leaders who might be great functional leaders to become company leaders. And we'll go into that a little bit more and what that really means. Obviously, there's a world-class network, and I think that that's been out there on LinkedIn a bit. If you follow anything on 30 by 30, there's a lot of mentors that are posting about their involvement in the program as well. And they all come from scaling companies. Some of them are from unicorns like Canva, Atlassian. And then there's others who are sort of emerging companies who might be 1 or 2 sort of train stops, we call it, ahead, who have seen those problems, but they've been recent problems or challenges, and they can help you solve them faster. The other thing that the program has is a great alumni network. As we said, we've run it for 2 cohorts. That's 18 companies. That's a lot of other leaders that you can rely on to help solve problems together. The last part is global promotion. So our partner Global Vic on the program, they help us with their network across many geographies, and they have people on the street who can help you figure out which people to meet when you first land in a new country. And we also put a bit of a PR push behind this program and all the companies as well. So what does the program actually look like? There's 2 components to it. There's the upskilling part, which I touched on before, those mentors coming in and sort of helping you see a couple of train stops ahead. This is going to come up. You need to get ahead of this. But yeah, there's 6 capabilities that these mentors have helped us to create. And there's sort of common things that whether you're in HR, ops, or finance, that you really need to get ahead of. And so we have no panels, no lectures. We don't have 2 hours of you sitting there and having to take notes. These are really interactive discussions. The second part is coaching. So as a leadership team, HR, ops, and finance, plus the CEO, it's often what we hear from past cohorts. This is the first time they've sat in a room and actually talked about stuff like strategy and what are the sort of projects they can work on to help uplift their company and help them hit their stretch goal. You're matched up with a HR, ops, and finance coach, someone who's been there and done that from the Atlassians, from the Canvas, those sort of worlds. And you get 2 times 2-hour sessions at the start and the end of the program. And it's really invaluable. It's sort of you can direct the conversation where it needs to go to, but it is a great way to sound test things. These are the mentors. So a little bit hard to zoom in on all of these, but as I said, they all come from an operator background. They're either a HR, ops, or finance leader, and they've worked at either an international or a local scale-up or unicorn. So this is not theory, this is actual practical stuff. This is what some of the past cohort have said, and so they go through, and it's really exciting to see some of the comments from, say, Hammertech. And you can see here, Nick, who's the VP of Ops, and then there's Ben, who is the CEO, and how each of those who participated in the program, what they got from it, and what changed after the program as well. Laura from Mr. Yum too, is great to see how she's her and her team, what they got from the program. So these are the key dates for Cohort 3. Right now, EOIs are open. Go to launchpick.org and you can find the 30 by 30 page. Complete your EOI. It's really simple. It will take you about 2 minutes. That's just to get you into the loop. After that, there is a formal application period where you will need to submit an application. And why we have a bit of an extended process with this is, I mentioned before, one of the benefits is the network, and to make sure you have the best alumni, including this cohort, we're really, we put it through the ringers. And so we really want to make sure we have the right personalities and people who match in the room. So after that, there's an interview stage, and then by, before Christmas, we'll know who is in Cohort 3. Everything kicks off from January, late January, founder dinner, and there's a few other events, and then all the program dates are listed here as well. Don't worry, you don't need to note all of this down. It is in the program guidelines. You can download it from that 30 by 30 page on the launchpick.org website. So get to that now, go fill in your EOI, go learn about what the size requirements of 30 by 30 are. There are a few what we think are the right size teams to benefit from the program. That might be you have 50 employees, or it might be that you're at a certain revenue size of $1 million per month, or you've raised a $5 million round. There are others, but go check it out. You only need to make one of those to be eligible for the program. And we look forward to seeing your EOI and potentially your participation in the program. Thank you. We are joined by Jane Watson, who is the head of people and operations at XYSense. Thanks, Jane, for joining us.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to chat again.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about XYSense to kick things off?
Sure. So XYSense is a global occupancy analytics business. So we work with large multinational enterprises throughout the world, and typically the biggest companies you sort of heard of, upwards of 5,000, if not 10,000 employees. And we have a sensor, a hardware product, which is powered by computer vision, entirely anonymous, and that fuels and powers a data analytics platform and API integrations into these companies' workplace technology systems. And what we're able to do is provide your real-time insights into people movement and occupancy behaviours within workplaces, which enables companies to better plan and monitor their space, and also just find cost efficiencies and sustainability savings as well through obviously what is a big energy consumption place and a high cost centre for many companies. So really sort of empowering and enabling them.
It's pretty exciting. I mean, you mentioned there most of the Fortune 500 and companies use you. I think you're in 17 countries, is that right?
Yeah, installed in 17 countries.
Yeah, wow.
So an operating team in the US and in Australia. So, and soon to be expanding a little bit more broadly as well.
And as a head of people and operations, that makes it even more complex, right? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role and those complexities that you face?
Sure. I started describing my role as the only thing I don't do is engineering. So very much, and I think it's sort of changed over time. So when I first joined XY, which was 2.5 years ago, I was the first hire sort of working on the business. So really sort of taking that more managerial structure. So overlooking sort of the operations, people and finance aspect. And our founders are engineering people. And at that point in time too, we'd only just started to hire some go-to-market people as we were at that point of commercialization. So since that time, we've more than doubled the headcount. We've probably 6 times revenue on what we were at that point, if not a little bit larger, and have gone global. So at that point in time, we were just really serving the Australian market. so a lot of sort of building business foundations, but then more recently as well, we've sort of got a lot of those foundations in place. So I've even sort of transitioned a little bit more into customer facing roles. So doing a bit on customer success and sales. And that's been really with a view as well from an operations perspective and people's perspective of how are all these systems integrating, how are we enabling the companies to scale and making sure all of the functions and that global reach is really working whilst maintaining a lean team. So good to be doing what I'm sort of setting up and preaching as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds in 2.5 years, that's massive growth, and going global like that is massive. So it puts a strain on the business. And I remember when the XY Sense application came in, and you might remember that you were in cohort 2, which is the most recent cohort. Do you want to share something, for this info session about what that application process is like?
Yeah. We found the application process pretty straightforward and simple. And I think some of that, and it was kind of a realization we didn't know until we got into the program, but we were doing quite a lot of strategy and planning work beforehand. So we had a relatively good handle on what were our company's strategic goals, how did those goals shape and form initiatives across departments, and really also to forecasting, what were some of the challenges that we expected to face up with growth. So it was really a case of just disseminating and getting down, what we already had laid out. I think the biggest challenge we had, and we always sort of have this with various startup applications, is we're an enterprise business. So enterprise sales is very lumpy, and doing quarter-on-quarter revenue numbers can look quite odd for an enterprise because it's really large, or it can be a bit smaller. So sort of massaging and getting some of those numbers into a meaningful form was probably the greatest challenge we had, but nothing we haven't done before.
Yeah, no, very good. And I remember the interview you went through as well, and that was a pretty smooth process as well. And it's always good to get to know the teams, but vice versa, for you to get to know, the people you'd potentially be, working with as well. So that was great. And I reflected on that last cohort. It was a bit of, we've, run 2 cohorts, 18 companies. It's a good data point. Is that I've sort of put together what I think are the program benefits, and I'd love to get your take on them and, see if there's a thread of anything that occurred in XY Sense is sort of relevant to what I saw as an overall program benefit. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me while it comes up. There we go. Okay. So the first one, and you mentioned it already, XY Sense, and I remember on that day one, we had Jodie Oster joining, and you'd already worked on your strategic plan a fair bit. And that day really focuses on getting it down to a one-page strategic plan. Can you share a little bit about, how that day and, and how that, strategy and alignment within the program and what, at XY Sense?
Yeah, so we did go in with a strategy on a page, so you had that one-page practice. What we actually came out of from that first day, though, is we halved the content on that page. So we also realized we just had a lot there, and it also wasn't necessarily hammering home, how we needed to be going after particular initiatives. It was potentially a little bit more values based rather than, here is what we're doing. So we're able to get a lot sharper on that front, which was great. And I think that's been a practice and a process that's really carried us through from there. I also, I think one of the things that we found really valuable, and this may sort of go into the company leaders part that you've also talked about, is, so it was myself, Scott, our head of finance, and one of our co-founders, and well, 2 co-founders came. One co-founder did the HR stream, but it enabled us to just have that time and space to step out from the day-to-day and really sort of challenge each other and think through what it is that we were saying, how we were saying it, and also to get that objective perspective from outside the business as to what the plan was. Because I think you can go to a board meeting or you have your investors and they've got a vested interest already. So being able to have, I really always call it the critical friend who can take a look at things. They don't have a bone in the fight, and they can be really clear and share a new lens on terms of like what it is that you're saying you're doing and how that's being positioned as well. So that we found super helpful.
Scale ups all need a critical friend. That could be one of our taglines.
Yes.
No, it really does touch on the company leaders. And I remember all three of you and then Alex joining some of the sessions as well, with the whiteboard out and it was great to see that dynamic. So definitely touches on point two already. In terms of world-class network, we have 50 mentors in total, some from ops, some from HR, some from finance. Were there any standout sort of sessions or mentors that, that you met that helped you? You mentioned before about the challenges, you already had them written down, but any that sort of like touched on that or helped you with that?
Yeah, I think there was lots of part, and I always had trouble pulling out one mentor or a couple of mentors who were most impactful, because to me it was actually the real diversity and different perspectives that all kind of meshed and layered together to give a lot of insights. I think one of the aspects I really appreciated and I think was super unique and a real privilege to have was the fact that the net was cast really wide in terms of great mentors. So it wasn't just who was local and regular faces who always pop up in the Australian or even Victorian startup space. It was very much, how can we find some of the best minds and the best experience around the world and enable them to come into the program. So obviously, using Zoom, that worked quite well. But I think to have, those people who've been through a couple of rounds of scaling up an organization and internationally, and to be, joining from wherever they are in the world, it's a pretty unique and special opportunity. And I think, that was a huge takeaway, that, just to have that insight. And I think, again, it really enabled us also to come back to the business and other functional leaders and to be able to talk about, the caliber of people and what we'd heard, to bring others who weren't doing the program on the journey with us and disseminate and share some of those learnings that we had.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I know that, as part of the program, you get some exec ed budget, and you did actually get some of the mentors to come back to the office so that others in the company could learn that as well, which is awesome to see.
Yeah.
Also the rest of the cohort that you met up with, and we have an alumni session as well. How's that? Do you still keep in contact with anyone?
Yeah, do. So it was actually just last Thursday night, a couple of us went out for a meal just to catch up and share how we were going. So, and it was a great dinner of, it's part social because we had become friends, but it was also a really great forum of actually touching base on how work's going for each of us, various challenges that have come up, things that we've been learning. And I think, again, as well, you occasionally need a vent and a frustration. And so just to have some close, group of people who understand your business, understand what you're going through, and to be able to have those really open and honest conversations is also really good therapy.
No, it's so true. Startups are so lonely because, if you go to the barbecue with friends and they're not in startups, they don't quite understand. They're like, what? A technology? So it is one of the, I say at the start of the program that we could lock you in the room and, just the cohort, and you would solve a lot of problems together because you are all smart. You just don't know each other yet. And so now it's so good to hear that you're still catching up for dinner. And so the last point that I have is global promotion. And so I've seen a few standout companies. I'd like to think XY Sense would be one of those that, have really leveraged what's on offer. And I find that, in any program, it's how much you lean in and how much you ask. And I remember chatting with Luke, and I think he was heading overseas for, a visit, and Global Vic were in the room, at the same time we're having an alumni session. And so we connected them, and, could you share anything about that and how, like the program and Global Vic, who was part of the program, have helped XY Sense?
Yeah. So two really strong examples on that. So the first of all, India has become a market that we've had really substantial growth in, and we're even right now in the process of setting up an entity there, which is partly a tax requirement, but it's also it is likely our company revenue will double just based on, 2 Indian deals in the next little bit. So we were able to use the budget there to have, it was our 2 co-founders actually went to India for sort of business development meetings and securing and locking up some of those deals. But it also enabled us to connect through Global Vic into organizations and advisors that have enabled us to set up an entity. Because obviously there's a lot of tax and legal requirements, very hard market to just go and, search the web and find someone. And we had some really great advice there, and even down to little things like, when traveling over there, make sure you get a driver who can sort of take you around, because you will spend so much time in traffic and you'll want to be doing work in the car, and just gets you around. So things like that have been incredible. And then I suppose the next exciting part, I'm actually going to be heading to London in November for the month, and starting the process setting up our UK entity. And I've been able to touch base with a prior alumni of the program, so who was in Cohort 1, who did a similar thing for his business. And so being able to sort of share some of those learnings and insights to help us navigate, again, trying to find some shortcuts in terms of, it's all the boring stuff, bank accounts, tax, legal, all of that stuff.
Yeah, but as soon as it's a bit like whack-a-mole, right? Once you fix all those things, you can go into the higher order stuff, which are the multipliers, like you're talking about commercial meetings and stuff like that. But if you don't have the foundation, and that's where a lot of the biggest risk, operational risk, comes from, right? If you don't have the foundations in place.
And I suppose on that, because one of my first roles at XYSense was setting up our US operating entity.
Yeah.
We're probably, we're a good 18 months down that track, but so many learnings. It took so long. And, we're now getting into the mop-up stages of, the tax fines and things like that. Just comes to the US, of where you didn't have everything perfectly sorted.
You are not alone. I've heard from many a mentor who has done the same path, and, just wish you had been part of 30 by 30 earlier, then we could have helped you with that. No, this has been brilliant. I think the very last thing that I wanted to touch on is just the coaching sessions. And so, you had, your two co-founders and yourself and Scott, and you met with 3 coaches over 2 sessions, start and end of the program. Any key messages for the future cohort about how to get the most from those sessions?
Yeah. So I think those sessions are going to vary so much by company. And I think the one key message I give is, it is such a unique opportunity to have, back to that critical friend within, growing a business, of someone who can just give really objective and clear advice to you, and their job is to pick things apart. So I think being really open to what comes your way, and also being really vulnerable about what it is that you're sharing, is really, it's a one-off sort of thing that you tend to not get. And again, it is that sort of deep counseling session in some ways. We went pretty deep and honest throughout it. And we've got like a pretty high sort of functioning, really good collaboration between our group, but it still did uncover a few areas that we actually did have some blind spots on, and weren't so aware. And there was room for us to really step up our level of communication, and be a lot more courageous with each other and what we were bringing about. So that was really helpful. And that also too was the platform to enable us to come back to other functional leaders within the business, and share as well some of those insights as to, Alex's favorite quote. Now it's done the rounds a bit of, I was able to tell him I thought his head was buried in the sand at times. So that has been something too that's been we've been able to jointly share with the organization, and use that of like, hey, we actually want to know, we should be bringing this stuff up, like we do need to be told. And so that's sort of created a much more robust platform and dynamic conversation between us all.
So good. If the next cohort can get as much as what you just described there, like as I designed the program, it's like all these things that happen after the program you can't really design for, right? So to hear these things, like this is honestly, I hadn't heard this stuff before, and it's so exciting to hear. Any last messages for the future cohort? Anything that you give them as advice, or anything? I know you just gave on the coaching sessions, and that was great advice, but any messages to any founders or execs who are out there thinking about applying?
An observation thing, this is probably a message for founders, is make sure the team and participants who are going through the program are really empowered and able to come back and lead some of the actions from the program. So I think, every company's got a different sort of org design and structure, but certainly did notice too, like a couple of participants from companies who weren't necessarily in that, senior position because they didn't have whether it's an ops person or whatever, to drive some of that. So I think that's something that's really important. The other aspect I would say as well, just to any participant, you don't know what you don't know. So really going in with just that open mind, blank sheet, being really receptive to, sure, you might have been doing something one way. You don't know what the other ways are out there. You don't know what the other challenges are coming up. And just having that openness and receptiveness is really valuable. And even as well to some of the things we realized were, actually we're doing things right. You don't necessarily get to hear that. You're always the worst critic. But it was good too to get some of that confidence as well, in terms of, we are on the right track in some things.
Yeah, so true. It is good to hear the compliments as well as the things that can improve. And what you're saying there, it reminds me that I've heard it from a few teams that what worked yesterday may not work today. What won't get you to where you need to be tomorrow. So I think that's sort of a motto of the program as well. So it's been so good to chat, Jane. So good to hear that you're still catching up with some of the alumni, and that keep using the benefits from the program, keep catching up, and we're going to see you in February. I think the first event is where we're going to have all the alumni come in and meet all the new cohorts. So everyone say hello to Jane and thank her for her time when you meet her in early February. Thanks, Jane.
Yep. Look forward to seeing the cohort then.
Cheers. We are joined by Mark Orchard, who is a facilitator in the 30 by 30 program, and he's going to share everything behind the scenes that occurs in the finance stream and other parts of 30 by 32. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Pete, and great to be here. And I'm very much looking forward to exploring some of the inside of baseball on the 30 by 30 program, particularly for those who are looking to apply for this next cohort.
Perfect. Why don't you start that off and just share a little bit about your role in the program and sort of like how your past experience as well and how it's led to this.
Yeah, got you, Pete. So my name is Mark. I'm the facilitator for the finance stream at 30 by 30, which is a wonderful position. I get to be the tour guide and concierge through the program for those who are specifically doing the finance stream, but also through the group sessions, we get to spend a fair bit of time with most of the participants. My background originally was in financial planning, Pete, so forgive me, but a lot of my initial clients, or some of my high net worth clients, were investing in these things called startups with Steve Baxter. And when I sold that financial planning firm, I ended up at running the Fishburners co-working space up here in Queensland, which then turned into a role at BDO, the accounting firms, running all their startup and scale-up programs. And what we noticed there was that a lot of the startups really struggled with their basic financial literacy and turning that into a business strategy, which then turned into a commercialization and go-to-market strategy. And so we had all these really awesome high-growth companies with really great products and big aspirations, and didn't always know how to turn that into a commercially viable business. And so at BDO, we created a whole number of programs and skill sets and services specifically for high growth companies. But what we found is that there was also an interesting opportunity to upscale the executives specifically in that finance stream, because running a startup or a scale up, particularly financially, is very different to a small business. And so we came up with this really interesting expertise there. And recently I've launched a business in that space, the CFO as a service company for high growth tech companies. But what that means is that we can get best of breed real-time information and program design specifically for the finance stream here for 30 by 30. And I'm excited, Pete, because it's never boring. Finance in particular is never boring.
Well, you definitely make it very exciting. I know all of those leaders walk out of those sessions very inspired. So we have each month, just for behind the scenes, all of the facilitators and me, we generally do a lot of retros. So we think of 30 by 30 as a bit of a startup. And, at the end of last cohort, I sort of pulled together my thoughts and after 2 cohorts, there's enough data points there to pull it together. And so what I'm going to do, Mark, is just share a couple of slides that I just shared. I was just going through it on the info session a moment ago before you joined. And so I'm going to pull it up. And the first slide is really around the program benefits. And these are the 4 areas that I'd love your take on without naming names. I'm going to go through each of them and we'll pause and, you give your reflection. If you can just give some insights of what you've seen has really impacted some of the companies that you've worked with, both as a coach and as a facilitator in 30 by 30. And so the first one that I saw is that it's a bit about what you just mentioned there, is that like they've got big goals, but not everyone is aligned to those goals, perhaps. And so we've seen teams that come in and day one are sort of like, I've got a huge strategy, but haven't got it right down on one page. And it's much harder to condense it. But can you give any examples or any tidbits of what you saw in last cohort?
Yeah, got you. So the fascinating thing about the group or the cohort that we're working with here, Pete, is that they're really sophisticated in the sense that they've usually raised capital. They've already got quite a substantial number of clients or beta customers. Like the reason why we're coming through the 30 by 30 program is that aspirationally they have the potential to be a unicorn. But it's fascinating how some of these really basic pillars, particularly when it comes to the internal team, and if your team is relatively mature, so hasn't had a huge amount of experience in working in a high growth company before, how some of these things become really important to go deep in. And this is what I think 30 by 30 is super interesting. With that strategic alignment piece in particular, one of the things that we found is that a lot of the founders had a really strong underpinning of a strategic plan, but they weren't communicating it super well down to the executive team, and they weren't giving the executive team the opportunity to be able to contribute back up. And so a lot of the time, an inexperienced executive wants to take ownership of their function and wants to do a great job, but doesn't always feel comfortable either giving feedback to the founders or the CEO that there's things that need to be changed or improved, and vice versa. There isn't always great communication down as to why certain decisions have been made. And so, Pete, in regards to company leaders, I think that one of the things I loved most about 30 by 30 was that everybody who came through my finance function was an amazing functional leader. They understood what being a CFO or a financial controller meant in the context of their business. They all had all the technical skills. It was then that next stage of management skills, the ability to be able to step up and to be a competent strategic leader in the business, not just a passive head of function, that I saw the biggest change through the cohort. And I'm thinking someone like Lockie from Great Wrap, like he did such a great job of completely transforming his approach for the role and came out of the program with a really, really good sense of his position in business. But for their founding team, they really loved the feedback that Lockie was giving them specific around some of the commercial decisions that they needed to make.
Yeah, I remember you walking out of that coaching session, and even one of the other coaches mentioning that there's a new Lockie in the room, which is great. Yeah, and that's what really our promise, to everyone who comes through the program is that, you're obviously a great functional leader, but helping through that alignment, helping you to become that company leader and find your voice. So that's that. The World Class Network, you and I sort of spend a lot of time on this each month, making sure we have the right mentors for the right topics. And we also spend a lot of time really rethinking those 6 capabilities that we go through. So, walk us through a little bit of that and some of those mentoring sessions that really stood out for you.
Yeah, got you. So I think one of the hardest things to do as an executive is to be able to find peers and to be able to find mentors who have experiences that you need to learn from quickly without having to go through that experience yourself, Pete. And so to your point, like you've done an amazing job collectively with this program to attract like some of the best world-class like executive mentors that we could in the 3 functions in the finance, HR, and ops streams that we do. But specifically, I guess, with finance. So one of the things that's interesting with finance is that it's a similar skill set across all the different businesses, but all their contexts are really different. And so one of the things that was really great with the mentor network is that we're able to amend or to be able to bring in and to get some feedback from mentors who had specific experience running the types of businesses or the finance function of types of businesses that were in the cohort. So I'm thinking of like we had a couple who are doing like hardware or Internet of Things, and that's quite different to a SaaS company at scale, and being able to get somebody who has already got several years of experience who can kind of talk into some of your experiences. I know meant a lot for some of my startups and scale ups in the last cohort. We had some really great, really tactical conversations or mentors come in. And specifically off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Demetrio coming in talking about due diligence for that Series A or Series Plus due diligence round and how complex it can be and some of the things we can do in preparation for that. There was Ben from Immutable who came in and talked around risk management and commercial decision making. And one of our favorites, Alexi from Eucalyptus, who came in and talked about the ability to be able to create a diverse and functional finance team, specifically as you're transitioning from that Series A through to that scale and growth international type company. Like those are some of the topics I think, Pete, that you just can't find someone to give you feedback or information or a masterclass on without having like a network like we have at 30 by 30.
Yeah, it's so true. I don't know where else you'd be able to build that up and find it. And look, all of these things, these three, alignment, company leaders, and world-class network lead to, being able to go global and handle more scale. And so, we really, as I mentioned earlier in the info session, support those founders and the teams. We put them up there in the spotlight as a future unicorn, but also, help them and tap into a network globally as well. I'll move on to the next part, which is really about the program design. I feel like we've chatted about upskilling a bit, and that was really good, those insights you gave about those mentors that came in. The thing that strikes me there is that, with the upskilling piece is how many of these leaders are willing to give up their time. These execs have sort of, been on that journey. And I think it just goes to the testament to the ecosystem in Australia that people are willing to give back like that. And we really have, and this is really always something that we iterate on, Mark, and I won't go through the nitty-gritty details of it, but there are 6 capabilities. There is a structure to this. We don't just go sit in a room and meet a mentor and good luck. There is a structure, and you mentioned a few of those things, like due diligence and stuff, and it's often things that are neglected, and you might think, oh, I'll figure that out later, but when it's later, it's too late. And so what I really would like to tap into on this slide is, it's sort of the coaching experience. We do it at the end of the program and at the start of the program. And there's a HR and an ops and a finance coach, that are brought in. And again, without sort of, going into too much nitty gritty on the actual, we do have Chatham House rules. So, anything you can share about why you think these coaching sessions, the magic of it?
Yeah, got you. So one of the things that is complex about being a board member or a management team or a founder or an executive in a company like this is that it's hard to have an objective session with somebody with no vested interest who just wishes you well, but has the technical capability and the commercial experience to be able to give you really clear, concise, and hopefully poignant feedback on things that you can improve, questions that you could be asking, ways of work that you could possibly implement. And I think that when it came to this coaching piece, it was a real solidifier for the founders and the executive teams on how far they had come, because we kind of tip and tail the program with a conversation at the front with the coaching teams and with the cohort leaders in regards to what they aspire to do and what's their aspirations and what's their plan to do so. And they go through the program, and at the end, they have this quite intense coaching session. And the difference between the executives at the start versus the end, in some cases, was like exponential growth, Pete. In regards to the founders, like just hearing them to be able to reflect from the coaches, like what they were hearing and what are some of the things they could improve, but also from the executives in their team, being able to hear their feedback in a really clear and concise way, with the expectation of being able to support progress. Like the goal is not just to tear apart different parts of the business for the sake of best practice. Like everything is done in this program is very pragmatic and very much focused on acceleration and progress. I think the thing that I took away from it is that the questions that you can ask that actually creates like a really strong like team dynamic to be able to then really push the companies forward, all comes from being able to have a little bit of insight as to how the team is working and where there's some opportunities to be able to push in deeper for better outcomes. And I think the coaches in particular that we've been blessed to have as part of this program, in the session I had with Matt and Nicole, you just can't get access to these people in this type of comprehensive way in almost any other way, Pete. And so I guess the thing that I'm excited about, both with the upskilling and the coaching parts to this, is that like the people that we have access to are world class. Like it's all pragmatically driven. So there's no, as you said, lectures. There's no panels. The goal is to be very practical, pragmatic, and progress driven. And then that feedback loop that they have at the end gives them really clear insight and a real strong 30, 60, 90-day plan on how they can progress to those next couple of milestones. I don't know where else you can kind of get that type of feedback at a Series A plus type level, right? So this is what I think is kind of the magic of what we're doing here.
Any last thoughts that you have for this future cohort?
So from my point of view, there isn't much professional development opportunity specific for scaling like Series A plus and like unicorn aspirational companies across Australia that has this level of network, I guess, session driven specifically for the executives rather than just for the founders. And then more broadly, like that alumni group at the end of it, Pete, like we've already had 2 cohorts now, and some of the companies in that cohort have already done some amazing things since they've gone through the 30 by 30 program. And so I would very much encourage, if the founders are on this call who are listening, about whether or not this program could be a real litmus test and an acceleration of their company. I'd love for them to put the application and go through the process just to get to know you and the team and see whether this would be a good fit for them. And if there are any executives that are as part of this call, like I would suggest that this would be the best professional development that an executive could go through at a high growth company, particularly those who are pretty new to the industry. I don't think you could get access to this level of masterclasses, network, and alumni experience anywhere else. So I hope to see them as part of the next cohort, Pete.
So do I. So do I. So thank you very much for your time, Mark. It's always good to chat, and I look forward to seeing you. Well, we kick off in January, February time. So we'll be seeing lots of you down in Victoria then.
Awesome. Dream team, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.